your point, we may have more gold. There are U.S. trusts at Sullivan and Cromwell, New York, that we don't know the names of. Maybe they stole gold from China or Japan after Japan pillaged China. I don't know. That's a Tom Clancy novel. It could be much more than 8,000 tons, could be less. But I do think, from talking to Alistair McLeod and others, and based on what supply and demand forces and the fact that Russia and China are major producers and their citizens and bankers are holding, I think China and Russia have more. Do I know the exact amount? No, I don't. But it will be very destabilizing. So there is a lot of strings to pull on this revaluation point, is what I'm trying to say, Michelle. But it is a symptom that the dollar isn't the dollar it was 10 years ago, and certainly not what it was pre-weaponization in 2022.
And I recall in our interview, I believe it was circa 2022, that you said that the excessive weaponization of the dollar by the Biden administration, kicking Russia off the SWIFT system, combined with the debacle of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, would be a turning point. That this would be a moment that we would come back to look at in history as a tipping point, the beginning of the end. And we did subsequently see that de-dollarization trend accelerate quite dramatically since then. Ray Dalio, as we know, obviously speaks about the rise and fall of empires and of civilizations. And we know that global currencies come and go. I always like to point out the fact that there was a time when the Portuguese escudo was the global reserve currency. And people forget they have recency bias. Again, this is not certainly anything I'm rooting for. As a proud American, certainly not rooting for this. But Ray Dalio posted recently, the US dollar used to be backed by gold, and it's not far-fetched to think we may be headed there again in the future. History shows us that the same cycles repeat time and time again. One such cycle is related to currency devaluation. Once people start to lose trust in the fiat system, we see a specific cause and effect reaction occur. Governments print a lot of money. They pay off the debt with the cheap money. Nobody wants to hold the devalued currency. Governments go back and link money to gold. Will this same pattern happen again? It's hard to say, and it wouldn't happen anytime soon, but it is conceivable. So he's not saying it's happening anytime soon. I suppose that's the plus side. But the U.S. may be forced into this position. You mentioned the BRICS, and we are seeing them move away from the dollar. There was some talk of a BRICS-backed common currency backed by gold. China is putting together some digital yuan global settlement system with gold as an underneath layer of all of this. Could the U.S., be forced into this position? You're saying, this is a desperate measure. You're saying, the Trump tactics aren't going to work, at least not anytime soon. We haven't really touched on stable coins, but even though they're supposed to create more demand for treasuries, I'm assuming, well, that could be a backdoor to a CBDC, which we'll get into, but I'm assuming you don't see that as any kind of big, rescue plan here. So what happens? You're saying gold is going to become part of a monetary system backbone. How do you see this happening? How do you see this playing out? What do you think is the next stage here, whether we revalue the gold or not?
Listen, I'm a huge fan of Ray Dalio, and I think he has a point, but I do not see a gold-backed US dollar anytime soon at all. And I'll give you the reasons why. And I never saw a gold-backed BRICS currency even during the hype 3 years ago when they were meeting in South Africa or when they were meeting in other places. I never saw a gold-backed BRICS currency. I don't see a gold-backed US dollar. And the reason why is because it's the William Jennings Bryan cross of gold speech at the turn of the century. A gold-backed currency, sound money, which I would love to see because it's a chaperone on how much money you can create to monetize your debt, is what, by the way, the founders of our country and the writers of our Constitution warned us of and said we should never leave. But once you leave it, it's too addictive to stop. In other words, gold was supposed to be a chaperone, and it is sound money, but a gold-backed currency is that chaperone on the currency. It limits the amount of spending, it limits the amount of debt, it limits the amount of credit a country that can produce. And unfortunately, modern governments are so addicted to easy money and credit and the political power, being able to produce and spend beyond their means by monetizing that debt with fiat rather than gold-backed money, because fiat money gives them no limits. Gold gives them limits. So the realpolitik is countries don't want to limit their ability to debase their currency to stay in power and blame it on some extraneous event. So no, I don't see a US dollar being backed by gold. I never saw with the BRICS. What the BRICS have done isn't make a gold backed BRICS currency. They've made gold a neutral reserve or a set of trade settlement assets. In other words, you can trade in local currencies for hard assets or goods and then cover the delta with gold. Because even the BRICS don't always trust each other or agree with each other on everything, but they do agree on gold for trade settlement. And again, that's what I see with the US. They're not going to use gold, a gold revaluation to get a gold backed dollar. They're using gold revaluation to give them some quick cash to pay down some debt. It's like you find it in your mother's purse and you use it to pay down some debt. They found some gold at the Fed. It's got some certificates that can be revalued. Let's use this to pay down some debt. But that does not mean they're going to a gold backed dollar. And I wrote an article a few months back about the death of constitutional money when we got off the gold standard, when we got off a gold backed dollar that was promised to us by our founding fathers who warned us 250 years ago that if we go off the gold standard, we'll eventually destroy ourselves. That's why Article 1, Section 8 says gold and silver. But during the Civil War, which was a national security crisis, obviously, which I've studied both as an economist and as a geek, I'm fascinated by the Civil War, but we got into the greenback. We got off the gold standard that was temporary. We then had resumption acts that followed. I won't get into the weeds. We even got into a discussion about a gold backed treasury in those days. Bottom line, and the theme of that article was when things are going well, we'll look at sound money. As soon as things are going bad, we get off of sound money. We don't talk about it anymore and we just get off it altogether. 1971 put the nail in the coffin on that. But even US treasuries, they wanted, the courts were asked to back that with gold, and the court said, no, our dollar is just as good as gold and silver anyway. I'm simplifying, but that just wasn't true. And now what we're seeing is we do know that our dollar isn't that good. We do need it gold backed, and we'll probably have to do it in the treasury. But no, I don't think we'll back our dollar
Right.
with gold because that would limit our ability to run negative rates and inflate our way out of debt on the backs of the average citizen. And I don't even think the BRICS want a gold backed BRICS currency. They want to use it as a trade settlement. It gives them leverage in the world. They want to save in gold and spend in regional currencies because gold is a better store of value than any sovereign bond, including the US Treasury, and any currency, including the US dollar. And that is the message I want viewers to get. Gold stores its value better than paper money. And that's why central banks and sovereign wealth funds, and even the US understands this. And that's why investors can understand this too. They spend in fiat, they save in gold. They don't want to save anymore in the US 10-year treasury, that risk free return, which I've said many times is just return free risk. The jig is up on the over indebted, criminally negligently run US IOU, and the jig is up on the dollar. It does not mean the end of the dollar. It does not mean the DXY goes to 50. It just means the dollar is going to be repriced. And that's happening in real time. We're all excited about the dollar rising. It was at 108 at the beginning of this year. It's what, at 98? Again, Brent Johnson and I have argued about this. He's very smart. He could be right, but I'm saying what's missing in that argument is the love for US Treasuries is quantifiably changed, the trust in it is quantifiably changed, and the desire by institutional money from the BIS to the IMF is clearly pointing towards physical gold, that analog pet rock. This is not a gold bug case. It is empirically and objectively the case. And we saw this coming the direction of this puck since 2022 and then some. But again, it's not an I told you so moment. It's just following debt. It's following gold movement. It's following the price allocation. And again, it's not meant to be smug. It's very sad when gold is at 4,800, 5,800, 6,000, because that means the price of a loaf of bread, a doctor's visit, or a dental trip is going to be more. Gold is not a speculation asset. It is to keep you from getting poor. It is to keep you protected from the invisible tax of currency debasement. Again, David Hume, von Mises, Ernest Hemingway, etc. This has been part of history, not just part of current speculation.
And you have said, Matthew, currency but debasement, then war. So you're
Mhm.
saying that, okay, you don't see necessarily the end of the dollar. Absolutely understand why central banks do not want to have a gold backed currency. It does limit their ability
Mhm.
to click money. But you're saying
Yep.
there's a problem. You're saying revaluing isn't really going to be a solution. You're saying the dollar is still
Mhm.
in this picture somehow, some way. But you're also saying, as you've said in the past, that currency debasement leads to war, that we are in the highest geopolitical tensions, I believe you say, since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We do
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
President Trump saying that the BRICS attacking the dollar is an act of war, and it's something that he's not going to let happen. We can play that soundbite, and I'll get your thoughts on what that means on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
BRICS was set up to degenerate our dollar and take our dollar as the standard, take it off as the standard. And that's okay if they want to play that game, but I can play that game too. So anybody that's in BRICS is getting a 10% charge. But what they're trying to do is destroy the dollar so that another country can take over and be the standard. And we're not going to lose the standard at any time. And if we lost the world standard dollar, that would be like losing a war, a major world war. We would not be the same country any longer. We're not going to let that happen. The dollar, you ever hear the expression, dollar is king? The dollar is king. We're going to keep it that way, okay?
So, what do you read from that, given the background and everything we've just discussed? I mean, could there be some kind of war to maintain the dollar's status as the king?
Well, look, there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot, favorable, unfavorable. Again, I want to give both sides to anything. I'm not trying to be partisan. I'm trying as hard as I can to be historical and mathematical. I'm even thinking of Jim Rickards, who wrote about currency wars, then trade wars, and then hot wars. These are, things that he's talked about. And there's Colonel McGregor, and there's others who are far more knowledgeable about military solutions or military options in this backdrop. When we look at that segment from Trump, the BRICS are trying to degenerate our dollar. Okay, there's no doubt that the BRICS are trying to are tired of being the dog wagged by the tail of the U.S. Fed and the U.S. dollar and monetary policies because we can inflate away our debt. That's the exorbitant privilege of having the world reserve currency. As Connolly said, it's our currency, your problem. We'll raise or weaken the dollar. We'll raise or lower rates, and the rest of the world has to react with their own currencies, and that's called seigniorage. It's kind of being at the mercy of these feudal lords in the U.S. with their dollar. And so the BRICS, he's saying, are trying to degenerate the dollar. No, they're just tired of being dictated by the dollar. This was made easier by the BRICS after we weaponized that dollar against the R in BRICS in 2022. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. As I've talked for years, Russia and China were looking for the pretext. This wasn't plan B, this was plan A. They wanted to de-dollarize for years. The weaponization of that dollar in 2022, which again, Barack Obama warned against, Robert Triffin warned against, John Maynard Keynes warned against, but somehow the Biden administration thought that was a good idea. The rest of the world no longer trusted the dollar after that seminal event. So first of all, yes, the BRICS are not trying to degenerate the dollar. They're just trying to move around the marginal line of the dollar and trade outside of the dollar. And really, again, trade in local currencies for hard assets and then net settle in physical gold. The other thing I think Trump is missing, but again, he's the president of the United States. He understands this. The other thing I think he's missing is that the BRICS didn't destroy the dollar. The bathroom mirror of every president since Nixon and every Fed chairman has been destroying the dollar since 1971 in particular. And frankly, since we destroyed constitutional money in our Constitution, again, that sounds sensational, but it's us running massive deficits, running massive fiscal spending, running massive monetary policies under the fantasy that we can print money and solve it without having inflation. And this is something that Jeffrey Sachs talked about in Atlanta a couple months. And again, the Trump camp who are going to be offended by this, but this is beyond left or right. What Jeffrey Sachs said about the dollar and about our deficits is it was very simple. If you and your wife or you and your husband go shopping on Rodeo Drive or Worth Avenue or Madison Avenue, and you spend a fortune on your credit card and you get that dopamine rush, you get that temporary prosperity of feeling smart, and then you get the bill and you look at how much in debt you are and what a deficit you're running. You cannot blame the stores on Rodeo Drive or Worth Avenue or Madison Avenue for your credit card debt. And in a sense, what Jeffrey Sachs was saying, again, he's a fairly clever guy, is Trump, like many other presidents, is blaming the world. He's blaming the shop owner for his spending habits or our historical spending habits. So again, we cannot blame just the BRICS for wanting to get away from a dollar that they've been had a boot to the neck on for decades. We can't blame them for wanting to go around that dollar, that weaponized dollar. And we certainly can't blame the world for our debt addiction and our spending mania. Again, red and blue, every president since I've been born has been spending. And David Stockman from my hometown, who was Treasury, who was under the CBO for Reagan, he was his advisor. He was a Republican. He was pro America, but he said we're spending on credit card spending. So it's not just me or Goldbugs or anti Trump or anti Biden camp. We're all guilty. All sides of the political aisle are guilty of spending money to stay in power and then giving the inflation bill to the man and woman on the street who are getting this frog boiled invisible tax of misreported inflation and are wondering why they're so socially unrested and so broke, and why business bankruptcies and small business bankruptcies are at all-time highs, why the pay now or buy now pay later programs are so big, while small business bankruptcies are rising, why retail sales are declining. Again, all these recession indicators that I've talked about before on Main Street, that's the fault of our own bathroom mirrors. That's the fault of our own policymakers. That's the fault of our own politicians, who, in my opinion, are pathologically more interested in reelection than they are in the next 20 years. And Thomas Hernick, who was the president of the Kansas City Fed, who dissented on almost everything in modern monetary theory and money printing. He was told by his mentor that a federal officer, an FOMC member, should make policies for the long term and let the short term take care of itself. That is very noble. Unfortunately, the reality is every elected official in the Senate, the House, and the White House is far more interested in the next 2 years or the next 4 years than they are in the next 20 years, which is why we've handed the next generation a dollar that, when I was born, $100 was $100. Now, from 1971 to 2025, that same $100 has a $13 purchasing power. That is a slow, invisible tax. That is currency debasement. That is appalling evidence that we have spent more than we take in GDP and tax receipts. And whatever you think of the BRICS, and of course they have self-interest, that is not the fault of the BRICS. That is the fault of our own drunken, criminally negligent monetary policy from the White House, from the Congress, and from the Fed. And the Fed, we can talk about, deserves some sympathy. They are trying to monetize the debt that our Congress and our Hill on the Hill spend. So you could give them some sympathy for the devil, but it really is the spending of our politicians, because there's short-term pleasure and there's short-term votes and spending beyond our means. But we've done that at the expense of our
Right.
currency, and that is not the fault of the BRICS, Michelle.
Okay, we're not assigning fault to BRICS. They have their perspectives, obviously.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
Western powers have their perspective. This isn't about fault. And yes, politicians, blue or red, have their own incentives and their own agendas, and staying in power is usually top of the list there. But given
Mhm.
we are where we are, Matthew, my question to you, seeing as you've studied the history and you've studied the data, what happens next? I mean, people are talking
Mhm.
about some kind of monetary reset. Hence, we're talking about the
Mhm.
gold. You've said we have a system that's terminally ill, that can't be
Mhm.
fixed. So, what
Mhm.
happens next here? Do we have some kind of war where the US or
Mhm.
somehow fights to maintain the exorbitant privilege that is being the global
Mhm.
reserve currency? Do we have some kind of
Mhm. Mhm.
cooperation, some kind of Bretton Woods agreement where, even though that was preceded by a war, which the US helped win and then hence had leverage at the negotiating table there? But do you think
Mhm.
when people talk about the bifurcation of the global monetary system and a monetary reset, do you think that that
Mhm.
is a reality that is inevitable? Yes, but also somewhat imminent in our lifetimes.
I mean, we all have to, none of us know for sure. I certainly don't. And again, you can use the Hemingway quote that all debt soaked nations enjoy a temporary prosperity of the debt and then the permanent ruin of currency debasement and war. That was in a pre nuclear era when he said that. Is war really an effective policy in a nuclear era? That's beyond my expertise. I didn't go to West Point, and there are certain people that think there are certain ways to win a tactical nuclear advantage. I don't know how that works. You can have smaller scale proxy wars like between Pakistan and India, or Thailand and Cambodia, and you can certainly have disastrous conflicts that we see in the Middle East or in Kiev. We definitely do see currency debasement and war. In terms of looking forward, is tariff policy just another form of financial war? World reserve currency status, that what Trump just said, there are many economists, you cannot have the world reserve currency status without military dominance. So these things are tied together: the world reserve currency status and military dominance. Um, but again, who am I to predict and who am I to make Pollyanna statements? It certainly makes more sense to me when I see wars that, as Jeffrey Sachs and John Mersheimer have said, our foreign policy since Vietnam and certainly since Iraq has been a disaster. I'll say this over and over as a friend of many veterans and as a family of veterans. I never blame this on the soldiers. I've said so many times. These are lions being led by donkeys. But even the soldiers I know who are in Iraq or Afghanistan from my hometown come back and say to me, what the hell was I doing there after a few years of reflection, a lot of PTSD? But the question isn't, are the soldiers themselves right? I agree with Mersheimer. I agree with Jeffrey Sachs, not because they're elitists at Chicago or Columbia, but because they're very smart and informed historians of our foreign policy. That our wars since Iraq, including Iraq and the non-weapons of mass destruction and the dishonesty at the UN and what we were told about weapons of mass destruction, I think they're all disastrous. There hasn't been a good one since. And I think, like Jeffrey Sachs, that the war in the Ukraine was avoidable. That's not pro Putin or Zelensky. We were right on the border of a peace deal in Turkey, and Boris Johnson, of all people, came in with Kamala Harris and blew that up. It's almost as if that was an intentionally created war. That's a rabbit hole. But will war be an effective, sustainable policy? I believe in what Saint-Exupéry here in France said about war. No one wins. There's just the last to rot. I don't believe in a nuclear military solution. So what does that leave us with? That's my opinion. What does that leave us with? It leaves us with either competition or cooperation. It leaves us with what the IMF kind of telegraphed in 2020, some type of reset. It leaves us with what Scott Bessent is talking about, some type of Bretton Woods 2.0. It leaves us with the ultimate debate between John Nash and John Adams, or excuse me, John Smith, or Machiavelli. There was that famous scene you and I talked about off record the other day of that movie, The Beautiful Mind, with Russell Crowe, where John Nash, in Equilibrium Theory, this great Princeton Nobel laureate who comes in a bar in Princeton, and there's a bunch of guys, and one beautiful woman walks in the bar, and they're all trying to get her. And John Nash says, that's actually not the right approach. It would be better if we cooperated, because if we all go after the same girl, most of us are going to lose. Her friends are going to be offended. What would be better is if we cooperated, because what's best for all is best for the individual. And one of the men in the film and one of his students said, well, that flies in the face of Adam Smith, excuse me, not John Smith, Adam Smith, where the individual ambition is good for the collective. And he says, no, we have to rethink Adam Smith. What we're doing right now with our tariffs and with our dollar policy and with our military policy is a winner take all, winner loser kind of Darwinistic approach to tariffs, a Darwinistic approach to protectionism, a Darwinistic approach to foreign policy. Again, some will be for it, some will be against it. I would argue more with the equilibrium theory of John Nash that cooperation is better than military conflicts. That is very Pollyannish, and some even say communist, of which I am not. But I believe the better thing would be to cooperate. Is that realistic? No. So what we're probably looking at is more of a kind of coalition tribal reset with the G7, with the IMF, with the BIS telegraphing this. My question is, how do we do a global reset without the cooperation and the collaboration of the BRICS and Russia and China? And so, who am I to say if that's possible or not? Will it take more pain before we get to that type of that type of resolution? How many millions of Ukrainians have to die in an unavoidable war before we realize maybe peace is a better option, which we were so close to 3 years ago in Turkey? So again, we have to do stupid things before we get to cooperative things. And who am I to predict how it plays out? I certainly know how the dollar plays out because I know how debt plays out. Whether we do gold revaluation, whether we do stable coins, whether we find peace in the Middle East or the Ukraine, we still have a debt problem. And of course, I'm not saying it's the end of the world or the end of America, the end of the dollar. It's just a very, very different world and a very more difficult world, especially for the middle class and those who aren't protecting their currencies. So I don't know, Michelle, but we do know what's happening in real time is already bad enough. It'll probably take more irrational, stupid policies that fail until we're literally at a point where it's either sink or swim. And hopefully we learn to cooperate. But it reminds me of that scene in the Titanic where everyone's calm at first. Then you realize the water's rising. Then you realize there's not enough lifeboats. And instead of being cooperative, it's every man for himself. It's no longer the gentleman. It's no longer the decorum of ladies and women and children first. Then it's just every man for himself. And unfortunately, and I've said many times, whether you love him or hate him, Trump is not a leader. He's a winner. He believes in a winner and a loser. Some would admire that. That's the way he was raised. That's the way he thinks. That's the way New York real estate works. The way foreign policy works, the way the State Department works, and the way peace works is you have to be cooperative. You have to be more John Nash than Machiavelli. That's my opinion. Again, many will disagree, but it's almost irrelevant because the reset to come will have to involve, as the IMF said, they literally, I'll send you the graph after this interview, the whole basis for the new Bretton Woods 2.0, the whole basis is gold at the core. It's the best part of a bad idea because the other thing that comes with this new reset, which they telegraphed in 2022 or something, is central bank digital currency,
Right.
which, by the way, is just stablecoin. That's a segue into stablecoin. So it will be more centralization, and gold will be the good part of a bad plan. I've always said centralization is the end game, whether it's cooperative or not. It's less civil liberties and less financial freedom for all of us.
Yes, you have said that. And that does bring us to central bank digital currencies. If centralization is the end game, we touched on stable coins as a way to perhaps create more demand for US treasuries. But let's use that as a jumping point to talk about CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. And a reminder to our viewers, those are government issued digital dollars. They're programmable, they're traceable, they're centrally controlled. And again, the real concern is control, because a CBDC would let the government track every single transaction, track your spending, limit how or where you use your money, what transactions are allowed or not allowed, can even make your money expire if not spent within a certain amount of time. The biggest concern is that it gets linked to a social credit score, and that ultimately leads to an Orwellian dystopian future where if you don't behave, your money isn't being, you can't use your money, or you can only use your money to do certain things that the government allowed. And again, people say this is ridiculous, but A, it's happening in China with their social credit score and the digital yuan. And if COVID taught us anything, it's that when given the ability, governments will exceed their power. I remind our viewers that there were curfews in countries like Canada, where the truckers who were protesting against the vaccine were kicked off the financial system. And that's a lot easier to do when you have a CBDC. In certain countries, there were curfews, and certain goods were deemed essential or non essential. With a CBDC, that money can be programmed to just not be usable to conduct a transaction that the government may deem is not essential at a particular time and period. So,
Mhm.
anybody that knows me knows that CBDCs are one of my really, really pet passions.
Yeah.
And the good news is that the Senate is expected to vote on an anti CBDC bill that bans the Fed from creating one. That bill is still in progress. The language there may change, but essentially, it's the Anti CBDC Surveillance State Act, and it's designed to ban the Federal Reserve from issuing, testing, or implementing a CBDC. But as you mentioned, we have had the Genius Act pass. That has passed already. And critics say that this could be the stealth gateway to a CBDC style financial system through stable coins. What this act does is it creates the framework in the US for payment stablecoins. Again, for our viewers, that is digital tokens pegged one to one to the US dollar, fully backed by high quality liquid reserves like cash or short term treasuries. Only approved issuers like US banks, credit unions, financial firms can offer these tokens to the public. On the upside, it may create more demand for US treasuries. These companies do have to comply with AML, KYC, and OFAC rules. They have to submit to federal oversight, mostly from the OCC. Now, this law, to be fair, does keep the Federal Reserve out of direct issuance. But what it does do, according to some critics, is that it lays the foundation for programmable money, surveillance friendly digital infrastructure, and a multi trillion dollar ecosystem of narrow money, digital cash that does not circulate through traditional credit creation, held as tokenized treasuries, and sort of lays the groundwork for a potential CBDC, especially if this anti CBDC bill doesn't get passed. So, what is your take on this?
Well, you said so much there that is so good, and you are passionate and have been consistent in your concerns about central bank digital currency, and I want to answer them
I'm a
all.
libertarian, Matt. Essentially, I'm a libertarian. But go ahead. Is
It's
this a
very clear.
concern?
It is a concern, and there's a lot of reasons. And again, it goes back to the very opening point we made about debt. And I've said also, and many others would remember this, when you have a debt crisis, that leads to a market crisis, a currency crisis. It usually leads to a debt crisis. Obviously, the debt crisis leads to a currency crisis and a market crisis, and that leads to an inflation or a debasement crisis. And when the currency is debased, that leads to a social unrest because you're no longer able to buy things with your currency. Social unrest is always, without exception, solved by extreme centralization from the political left or right, the extreme left or right. And this is true throughout history. So again, debt to centralization is proven by history, not optimization models of the FOMC. That's why history and math both matter, which brings us to stablecoin, CBDC, and all the questions you've raised. Again, the Genius Act, like the Patriot Act, like stablecoin, they're all oxymorons. To me, the stablecoin is neither stable nor a coin. The Genius Act is not a Genius Act, it's a stupid act. And the Patriot Act was not patriotic. But those are just sensational things to say. What do I really mean by that? How are these things oxymorons? And to your point, hey, it's stablecoin. It's not CBDC. In fact, the same Genius Act was a bill that came out and it's being passed at the same time they're bringing this anti-CBDC Act out. And then whether stablecoin should be SEC or CFTC registered. So these three acts coming out at the same time. This is a classic example of the smoke and mirrors kind of disingenuity of DC legislation and the complexity of the plumbing. And I'm sorry to be so perma cynical, and some would say tinfoil hatted, but let's be clear. Stablecoin is CBDC by just another name. It's not issued by a central bank. It is issued by the JP Morgans of the world, the Tethers of the world, the Circle Internets of the world. And I'll explain why that's no different than a central bank in a second. But let's first be clear. The fact that they're outlawing central bank digital currency to calm the libertarians like you down from being intimidated is an insult to your intelligence. They're hoping that you don't understand the plumbing of what's really going on with stablecoin and the DLT ledger and the ISO compliant technology and the programmable trackable technology and the censorable technology that is still behind stablecoins. So no, it may not be from the Fed, but it's coming from JP Morgan, it's coming from fintech groups, and it's coming from these kingmakers that the Genius Act just made, including Tether and JP Morgan. If you don't think that that's linked on that DLT ledger to the government and you believe that's separate and private, that's your opinion. I'm saying my opinion, that's no different. That's half a dozen of this, six of the other. It's not just an entry drug to CBDC, even if they outlawed, excuse me, but it's just another form. These banks, the Fed, the fintech, JP Morgan, they're all part of a way to track and program and seize and censor your assets. That's the first thing. So no, stablecoin is not anti-CBDC. It's just another version of it. I strongly believe that, and I'm certainly not alone. The other thing about stablecoin, it's really basically backed by U.S. Treasuries, of course, short-term Treasuries, but that assumes that US Treasuries are stable. And if we learned anything from the banking crisis in 2023, Signature Valley Bank and First Republic were stable yesterday or one day, and they weren't the next day. In other words, this stable coin is a unit of account. You give a dollar to Tether, you give a dollar to Circle Internet, you give a dollar to JP Morgan's a stable coin account, and you'll get a dollar of electronic spending back. Meanwhile, those will take your dollar and they'll arbitrage it in the treasury market and they'll get yield and they'll make money off of your dollar while you go out and spend it anywhere you want with your dollar. It is a way to create demand for US Treasuries. It's a way to create demand for the US dollar right now because of stablecoin. Tether has made 26 billion in profits off of your dollars because they're arbitraging that on the treasury markets. And they're also now the 18th largest lender to Uncle Sam. So it's a win-win for Tether, Circle Internet, JP Morgan. It's not necessarily a win for you, the citizen. It gives you an dollar, but you're getting no yield on it. And you're subject to the risk of the treasury that backs that quote unquote stable coin. Again, you could argue there's no risk. I would remind you that there is risk in treasuries and you don't have to go that far back to see it. So again, it's not necessarily as stable as you think, and it certainly is not as freedom giving as you think. And it is very much CBDC in substance and form, in my opinion. So there's a lot of things wrong with it, but it's making these kingmakers very wealthy. It is a wealth transfer. There are sons of presidents and other insiders from Silicon Valley to DC who are going to make a fortune on this. That may be business as usual in DC, but it's no surprise there. But it's a kingmaker too, because only commercial banks can actually offer a stablecoin client some yield. The fintech companies can't. So they just made Jimmy Dimon even more powerful. And this goes back to this idea of the marriage between big banking, big government, big corporations. Again, I'm an American. I'm a patriot. Come from a family of veterans. Spent half my life in the U.S. I baseball scholarships. Please, I'm not anti-American, but if you're a patriot, you got to ask, is this patriotic? Look under the hood, look at the details. Um, I don't think this type of marriage between big corporations, big lenders, and government policy is to me, and this sounds sensational, the very definition of fascism, not democracy. And the fact that your programmable, trackable, seizable stablecoin just puts you into the gun sights like those Canadian truckers. If someday, 6 years from now, I write or say something that offends, or I join a group that offends the powers that be, I am now censorable, trackable, and seizable. I think if Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington and Thomas Paine and you name it tried to get together in Philadelphia under a stablecoin regime, they probably wouldn't be able to even afford the bus fare there, because by the time they wrote a couple of articles or got a few pages written or did a few interviews, they'd be trackable. So this may sound sensational. We should be very concerned about technology that outpaces wisdom. This is the problem with AI. This is the problem with the complexity and the plumbing of stablecoins and the disingenuous lipstick on a pig they put on it. It is an effect. Maybe it doesn't matter to some people. It doesn't mean you have something to hide. I have nothing to hide with my money, but I do have the right to privacy. And I do have the right to keep what I've earned. I don't like a system that can track and seize my assets because it's masquerading as some type of technological efficiency. And again, I'll quote Saint-Exupéry, who said in the 1940s, we were capable of manufacturing 1,000 pianos a day, just not one worthy pianist. Just because we have technology, just because we have a lot of smart programmers doesn't mean they're wise programmers, and doesn't mean the policies used by them are for our civil liberties or financial freedom. And this should be a concern to all critical thinking Americans, regardless of whether you're tech, left, right, pro gold, pro crypto. I'm all of those things, but there is a limit to the wisdom of this technology outpacing our political intelligence. And there's a dishonesty in not divulging and disclosing the risks behind the technological hype in the stablecoin. That's a long answer. I'm a libertarian too, Michelle, and it really upsets me. This Genius Act, which is the very opposite of genius, and this coin, which is the very opposite of stable.
Well, I think we're on the same page on that one, for sure. Matthew, we're running out of time, but I do have to get your thoughts on a couple of other matters. Otherwise, I would be remiss of me if not touched on Bitcoin. You mentioned crypto. Let's talk about Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin has recognized a lot of the same issues, CBDC, one of them for sure, but Bitcoin has recognized the same systemic issues that you've warned about: the sovereign debt crisis, the loss of trust in fiat currencies, debasement, devaluation. But instead of gold, they see Bitcoin as the answer. They draw strong parallels between the two. Both have finite supplies, are decentralized, represent essentially a libertarian form of money. Bitcoin is borderless, instantly verifiable, portable. The maxis see Bitcoin being layered in to the system somehow. How do you see Bitcoin fitting in here?
Look, Bitcoin and Ethereum are not nearly as censorable as stablecoins, for example, and
No,
some of
no,
these other
no, not
technologies.
so much as not in the CBDC kind of conversation,
Oh,
and I would not
okay,
group, and I personally would not group Ethereum and Bitcoin in the same
yeah,
category either.
not at all.
But
Yeah.
I'm saying if Bitcoin is seen as digital
Mhm,
gold, and if gold is
mhm,
potentially a layer to some
mhm.
kind of monetary reset, and a
Right,
way to bring back trust and confidence into the system, uh,
right.
can Bitcoin play a role here? Do you see Bitcoin playing a role? Could there be some kind of
Absolutely.
monetary reset with gold and Bitcoin?
I mean, it's a very fair question. I'm not one of those gold fanatics, gold bugs, or gold executives that has to mock Bitcoin to promote physical gold. I have a lot of close friends who are in the crypto space in general, the Bitcoin space in particular, and including Ronnie Sturfel, who writes the In Gold We Trust report. He takes crypto very seriously, takes Bitcoin very seriously. I don't think crypto investors or Bitcoin investors are insane for what they're doing, and I have a lot of conversations with them. And I learn a lot with each conversation. I don't think we have to be at odds to discuss Bitcoin and gold. First of all, our macro views, our libertarian views, and our sound money views about the U.S. dollar and the U.S. Treasury are basically identical. So 80% of the conversation between a Bitcoin expert and a gold executive are very symbiotic in osmosis and commensurate. The question I have is not a criticism. And I think it's a question that even serious Bitcoiners have to consider and gold investors have to consider too. Um, with Bitcoin in particular, because it is a much safer, less censorable technology. And it doesn't, we got to get into the origins of it or what that means, or Ripple and XRP highways and all these other debates, and Glenn Lilly and Jeff Mann and BTC. Is it Langley or Satoshi? Get past all that. Is it a store of value? Will it work in a system where the dollar doesn't disappear or become eradicated? It becomes less and less relevant, less and less safe, and less private. So, will Bitcoin be a solution? The simple answer is, and will it be a part of this new world order, disorder, whatever reset to come? Without saying the Bitcoin camp, it depends on your perspective. I can say I see central banks stacking physical gold more than Bitcoin. I can argue that gold has an historical larger role as a store of value than Bitcoin. But certainly, Bitcoin in a cold wallet is a heck of a lot easier to transfer. It's cross border. It's safer. It's more private, etc. So I don't want to say that that when gold rips, Bitcoin disappears and it's going to go to zero. What I think all of us have to look at in this debate is ultimately, despite the common macro view that Bitcoin and gold investors share, will Bitcoin continue as a speculation asset? There's nothing better. It's outperformed everything on its highs. It's certainly outperformed gold. Is it still a store of value? And I think the jury's out on that. I have strong opinions, but I don't want to mock Bitcoin investors for that. I think what will be interesting in the evolution of Bitcoin is what happens when we have a Bob Farrell moment in a 49x earnings ratio on the Nasdaq. If the Nasdaq has a mean reversion moment, how will Bitcoin track? Will it track north as the Nasdaq tanks, or will it track and correlate to Nasdaq and show itself as just another speculation tech stock, or will it divert? Will it convert outside of the Nasdaq narrative and show itself as an independent store of value? And we can argue, what is the store of value in Bitcoin? Is it its technology? Is it its price? What is it in gold? That takes hours. I don't want to mock crypto, and I certainly don't want to mock Bitcoin. But I think the real test will be, how does it behave in an uh-oh moment in the markets? We know how gold behaves. We've seen what it does, and we can track it. And we can argue we know how Bitcoin behaves in certain pullbacks or corrections, but we've never really seen Bitcoin in an uh-oh moment like '08, '87, 2001, 29. We've never seen it like I saw in the dot-com bubble, where what we thought were the greatest things lost massively. Bitcoin is not Amazon losing 92%. It is not the same thing as Amazon. But I think it'll be very interesting. And I think as a speculation, as an investment asset, there's nothing greater. It has a massive standard deviation, a massive volatility, which for me makes it harder for me to see as a store of value. And as a person who speculated on pre-IPOs and IPOs in the dot-com bubble, I am all about chasing the momentum and the sentiment to make money when I see something that obvious. And the question I have, and I'm not going to answer it, that's for everyone, is Bitcoin a sentiment momentum trade, or is it a new technology, a new libertarian way to store value and spend money? I think there are strong cases to be made for both. I'm not going to solve that today. What I love about the Bitcoin narrative and the Bitcoin rise is its disdain for reckless central bank policy, reckless currency policy, a government that insults your intelligence by trying to take your privacy and tell you it's good for you and that it's modern. I think all of those things about Bitcoin are extraordinary. And so I'm not going to make my gold case by insulting a Bitcoin crowd. And, I think the guys at Black Swan Capitalists and others who know this space are far more fluent than me. And I know some very bright people um, who are all about gold and also recognize and respect Bitcoin. I don't think it has to be a civil war between the two camps.
Well, I've always said that I'm in the camp of both gold and both Bitcoin.
Mm,
Underlying philosophy is the same there, but I get your point
mhm,
that it's still a risk on asset, and until we
mhm,
see it as a risk off asset and really decorrelate it from the Nasdaq and the markets, it would be
mhm.
interesting to see how that plays out as a store of value.
Yeah.
Very quickly, people say that quantum computing poses a potential existential threat to Bitcoin by potentially
Mhm,
breaking the encryption and undermining its security. Not going to have
mhm.
you weigh in on that. We'll get a Bitcoin expert to weigh in on that. But is there an equivalent existential or systemic threat to gold? What would be the gold quantum computing existential threat
Mhm,
equivalent?
mhm. Yeah, listen, and for any credibility to be a gold investor, and certainly someone who's a fiduciary in the gold space, if I just said gold only goes up and to the right, the gold has no risk, and the gold is bulletproof in every way, and that you should look at nothing else, I would listen to me either. Um, and I think about this all the time. It must be the prey or the predator instinct. What's going to screw me? That famous line in The Big Short. Where do I get screwed? What am I missing in the gold thing? What would be a demand killing event in the gold market? I mean, Francis Hunt's a great friend. I spent a lot of time in South Africa at the beginning of the year. He was a major gold bull, but even now, on a technical basis, he's seen some price pressure on gold, and that's a technical trading mentality. But the long-term direction of gold, we both agree, is very high. But to your larger question, what would really be a true existential threat to gold? Well, it's very simple because if you understand why gold is successful, you would understand why gold would be unsuccessful. And again, I've always said that we're not seeing a gold bull market, we're seeing a fiat or paper money bear market. A 400-ounce bar when I was born was about 17 grand. Now it's worth about 1.4 million. That gold 400-ounce bar didn't get smarter, shiny, or more useful. It's just that the dollar since 1971 got weaker. And the dollar got weaker, imagine that, because of our original theme, debt and debt expansion, exponential debt expansion, which comes from credit expansion, which creates more dollar debasement. So if the dollar weak and the debt weak dollar made gold strong, what would make gold weak? It would mean lower debt, better spending, not a gold backed currency, but sounder monetary policy. So, for example, if we got our debt to GDP down to 70% instead of 120%, if we kept a balanced budget, if we had free trade and we had peace rather than war. In other words, all these Pollyannish things, which I hope are actually possible. I look forward to the day where the world is so soundly run by intelligent men and women who agree with free trade, who agree with spending within their means, who agree that productivity is key to growth and that you can't grow without debt, that we have to live within our means. In other words, if we had a balanced budget, balanced deficits, free trade, and less war, gold would lose its value very fast. The
But
problem is, and I'm not a cynic, I don't see any of those things happening in the near term.
But would it though, Matthew? Because gold has been around for thousands of years as a store of
Well, it wouldn't.
value, as a sign of wealth. I mean, it's not dependent on the dollar and on debt. Gold has been seen as money, as a store of value for thousands and thousands of years. It's withstood various
Oh, of course.
empires
When I
rising
say it
and
would
falling.
go down, it wouldn't go
So,
to zero. I would never say that. It just wouldn't see these exponential moves. And again, it will always have, well, again, this is going to the Bitcoin. What's the use of Bitcoin? We make fun. Well, gold for fillings, jewelry, and earrings and wedding rings is it's more than that. But you could argue that there's not a lot of use for gold. But no, it will. And I would hope if we actually did get to sound debt, sound deficit, sound management, that would be, to Ray Dalio's point earlier, that's the point way down the road after a great deal of wisdom and reflection and cleaning the blood off the streets of all the disastrous policies we're in the process of doing right now. That's the point where you could have a gold backed currency, as our founding fathers argued from Article 1 of the Constitution. They had just come out of the French Revolution. They had just come out of England. They had just come out of taxation without representation. They wanted a currency that was real money that they knew could not be debased and politicized. And they said right there at the first opening of our Constitution, gold and silver. And what did we do? We ruined that. By 1971, we killed it. We messed with it in the 1860s and the Resumption Act of the 1870s. In the 1913, when we created the Fed, we found ways to destroy that founding principle. But our principle and our founding educated, I think, far-sighted founding fathers wanted sound money. And what Ray Dalio wants to get us back to is that sound money. And that's where gold would be valued as our real money. Do I think that's going to happen? No. I think fiat money will still be needed to debase the currency to run this absolutely maniacally poor monetary policy to keep people in power and to distribute that wealth transfer among a very small minority of insiders. And that is the libertarian in me and the cynic in me. But if we get past that, then gold will come to a mean reversion of normalcy and rationality, where its value will be based on as actual money in a system that is gold backed. I think we're a long way from there now. So again, I'm not saying gold goes to zero. I don't think of a demand killing event that could theoretically
But
hit Nvidia or theoretically hit Bitcoin.
But is there like an existential threat? And I'm bringing this back to one of the comments that was made in some of our videos, and we do read the comments, so please make sure to leave them. And one of the viewers was asking, what about a meteor hitting the Earth with tons of gold, and
Yeah.
that's sort of changing the supply dynamic? Gold being made in a lab, similar to like lab-grown diamonds. Do you see any kind
Yeah.
of yeah, you see that
Yeah.
happening? Do you see any like
No, I don't. I don't.
existential gold threat?
There are many the alchemy necessary to find an alternative or to create gold. I mean, it's been tried for centuries because gold has been known for centuries as the only real money. And again, this is the argument many anti-Bitcoiners would make: is Bitcoin and blockchain ISO compliant technology is just alchemy, but it's not really an asset on the periodic table, so to speak. I don't think that's a fair assessment or a fair criticism of Bitcoin. There's other values to Bitcoin technology, but whatever that technology is, however extraordinary it is, it can't compare to the indestructible nature of physical gold. I mean, as David Frisby and Alistair talked about years ago, it literally was created before our universe in the Big Bang. It came from something before even the Earth was created. And as you and I talked about elsewhere, there is literally a small amount of physical gold in our bloodstream. So there's something almost spiritual, visceral, timeless, and biological about this, almost something biblical, you could argue, about real money and sound gold. The Old Testament, the New Testament have had ways to criticize and critique gold and silver. Jesus was portrayed for silver coins. It's part of our culture, it's part of our narrative, but it's also part of our solar system. It's part of our DNA. It's definitely part of our system. So I don't think a new alchemy, a new created metal, could replace gold. Yes, I suppose a meteor could land on the Earth and create a new supply. I don't think the demand will ever change. I don't think the stock
Okay.
to flow will really change. So that's my view.
All right. So no major existential threats. Good. Good. At least we put that out there. And again, we do read the comments, so make sure to leave them.
Yeah,
Look,
I
as
could be wrong. Yeah.
let's wrap up here. And again, you advise clients, I believe, with at least $5 million in assets. You have your finger on the pulse of what's really happening with the world's wealthy. What are you seeing? Tell me what you're seeing right now, and how that ties into your highest point of conviction.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, it's a really wonderful opportunity to talk to some very successful people in different areas of life. And we have clients from over 90 countries. Most of them are self-made. They come from all different backgrounds. Our minimums are high, so they've gotten to a point in life where it's not about getting more wealth, it's about preserving their wealth. And so we have these conversations. They usually come to us pre-converted, so to speak. They already understand why gold, and now they're about how do I own my gold? How do I protect my gold? How do I legally keep a firewall between me and my government legally? And how do I ensure my privacy? How do I stay outside of the system? We have clients that come from the banking system. We have clients that ran money and portfolios in hedge funds. I myself and my partners are almost all former bankers. When we critique or look at how the sausage is made in the banking system, it's not just to be anti-bank, it's because we saw how they work, we see how they work. So these clients from different backgrounds, different professions, many of whom are from the financial circles, many have made their money as entrepreneurs, many have made it in Bitcoin. And converted their Bitcoin to gold. Again, not saying that Bitcoin's wrong, but they had the view that it was a speculation asset. Now that they've ridden that bubble as far as they want to take it, they're going to hold it in gold. Others will convert gold to Bitcoin, but we all agree in the central themes that I've been talking to you about. So your audience, whether they have 5 million or $5, should have the same knowledge. And the same knowledge is this: it is true what David Hume and Von Mises said. Debt does destroy. It does destroy nations. It doesn't ruin every life. It doesn't end the world, but it ruins your freedoms. It ruins your choices. We're seeing this in real time. Even those with escape velocity money are worried about their civil liberties and their privacy and their financial privacy. Again, not because they have something to hide, because they have something to protect. We're all concerned about politics. We're past the left or right debates. We're just seeing a debt crisis leading to more centralized control. That syllogism I talked about earlier, that's not extreme. That's very shared by very sophisticated families, family offices, investors, bankers, hedge fund managers. Of course, I can't give you their names. You'd be very surprised who some of them are. So these are not gold bugs. These are not tinfoil hatted. These are not anti-Trump, anti-Biden. They're just smart money, and it's way past politics now. It's way past even thinking we can solve all these problems. We can't. The one thing gold does for us and our clients is, at least in the financial part of our lives, I can't dictate policy in the Middle East, the East, Cambodia, India, the UK, the Ukraine. I have no real power over that, but I can protect whatever wealth I've earned in a long life of working very hard for it, just like our clients. And your listeners who aren't going to make $5 million minimums and be my client, that's fine. 99% of the people I talk to can never be our clients, but they can always protect themselves. And I take just as seriously a 27-year-old kid who'll fly from London to Zurich just to talk to me as he's stacking a few thousand in gold. He's just as valuable to me as the billionaire who's got a couple hundred million in gold. They're all people who care and work hard for their money and care about their personal freedoms. And I mean that sincerely. And I never forget my origins. I'm from the very lower middle class. So I take the hard work seriously of acquiring wealth, and I take the desire to protect it. And I'm very offended by the government's slow frog boil destruction and the slow tax on all people, in particular the working poor and the middle class, which is where I come from. And that angers me and incites me to understanding gold better. And again, whether you're a millionaire or whether you're not, you can afford some grams, maybe even some ounces. It's not a get rich quick. It's not an Nvidia trade. It's a protect yourself trade. It's an autonomy trade. It's a preservation trade. And that is true of millionaires to non-millionaires to billionaires. And yes, all of our clients, all of the things that we're talking about tonight, and we could spend hours on, understand this pretty much axiomatically. We're well past left versus right. We're well past any faith in any immediate solution. And we're not in the point of arguing that we're speculating for gold. We're doing this as a protection asset. My partner and friend, Egon von Greyerz, very successful as a FTSE 100 chairman, made a lot of money at the turn of the century, bought gold at $300. He has never looked at the price. He has never looked at the price. It was never speculation. It was just because he saw 25 years ago banking risk, geopolitical risk, and currency risk. He was right 25 years ago. He's just as right today. Yes, the gold he bought at 300 is worth a lot more. Yes, he's happy about that, but that was never his motive. His motive was to get out of this system, protect yourself in an asset that stores its value. And by the way, has massive speculation value over time. But we're not a get rich quick asset or a get rich quick company. It's a stay rich company, and it's a protect yourself company. And again, for people that can't make the minimums, you can still protect yourself with whatever you can afford. And I realize that's very hard for some people to imagine when they can barely make it through the month. That upsets me the most. In some ways, that's who I'm trying to talk to the most, even if it's just a gram a month or an ounce a year. Please try, if you can, to put it aside. I'm not promising you 10x multiples and instant wealth. I'm trying to protect you from the slow drip eradication of your purchasing power and your paper money, which to me is an insult to your intelligence.
All right. And I take it that is your highest point of conviction as we wrap up. Any final thoughts,
For
Matthew? And where can people find you?
Uh, yeah, I mean, myself and Egon and Alistair McLeod is now an advisor, along with Ronnie Sturfla, the author of the In Gold We Trust report. So we have a really great team on the front end. Our back end of partners and service providers are amazing, but we can be found at vg.gold or von greyers.gold. And our classic URL is always goldswitzerland.com. And interviews like this, articles that we've written, white papers on Bitcoin and gold, on all the issues on stablecoin, on gold revaluation, going back recent to 20-year library of articles are all there. And there's a whole page on why gold and how to own gold. Again, you don't have to be a client to get that education. Yes, it's a very biased education, but it's also a high conviction education, and it's yours to look at it for free. Obviously, it's not just about getting more clients. We really do want to educate as many people. Both Egon and myself are past the point where we measure ourselves by those metrics. We really want to have a legacy of educating what we can about sound money. It doesn't mean buy gold, but you should look at gold because gold is attached to history, and history is attached to math. And history and math are confirmation that many of the things we've been told are just untrue, and many of the answers are more desperate than honest. And that's really the fascinating part of the gold investment for me.
You know, Matthew, I really respect the fact that you own your bias. I think if we're all intellectually honest, we all have a bias, but coming out and saying it and owning it, but still being open to other perspectives is the really only way to learn and to grow. So thank you so much for helping our viewers learn and grow today. I really, really appreciate your time, your analysis, and your very, as always, colorful metaphors. Thank you, Matthew. Really appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure as always, Michelle. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to Miles Franklin Media and The Real Story, where we show you the real risks, the real shifts, and the real opportunities. Please comment, feel free to praise, whine, or just opine. We do love hearing from you, and we definitely do read the comments and the feedback. For me, Michelle Makori, and the rest of the team, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp.